Hi, in this video we are going to see some of the web method related interview questions, mainly from the developer point of view. So I'll start with the first question. What are the different steps in deployer and how to move the code using deployer? In web method, we will use web method deployer component in order to move the changes from one environment to another environment. It has few steps. So once you log in into deployer, so you'll create a project. It is having mainly these four steps: define, build, map and deployment. In the define step, we will be selecting what are the packages I wanted to select. It could be a full package or partial package. And then in the build step, we'll create a build using the component which you have selected in the define step. And in the map step, we will select the target server which I wanted to deploy it. In the deployment step, we will do a simulation, and then finally we will click checkpoint and do deployment. The simulation and checkpoint is optional only. And finally, when we click deploy, whatever the server we have configured in the map step, that's the server our component will get deployed. I'll move on to the next one. What is IDOC and BAPI in SAP? So in web method, if you have used SAP adapter, so mainly we use these terms very commonly. So one is IDOC. IDOC is nothing but it's an intermediate document which is used from SAP to send some messages outbound in a asynchronous manner. So when we wanted to send the data in asynchronous manner, then we use IDOC. SAP sends IDOC in this data format. For example, material master they use matmas, vendor master they use this cremas, and customer mas we have different type of IDOC types are there. For order we will use order IDOC. And mainly this IDOC structure, it's kind of a XML structure when we look at the web method site. So we can create the equivalent IS document type based on the SAP document type, which we can pull it from SAP. So once we create the SAP IDOC document type, we can high level, we can see it will have a control segment and also we'll have a data segment. In the control segment, we will have mainly the sender detail, receiver detail, IDOC type, message type and the direction of the IDOC, all the stuff. In the data IDOC, that's a place we will have the actual content of that particular message. And next one is BAPI. What is BAPI? Business Application Programming Interface. So this is mainly for the synchronous transaction. For example, I want to expose some data from SAP in a real time. Then I can use BAPI, which I can call from web methods to SAP. I'll move on to the next one. Can you explain the error handling framework in your organization? So in every client or every web method landscape, we used to have a error handling framework. So what primarily it does? So it's a kind of a common framework which we can write it. So which mainly get the error details using a get last error document or get last error built-in service. So once we have that error information, we will kind of log the error details, mainly the service name, date time of the error, exception detail and other key critical transaction information in a separate file. So mainly we'll just try to store it in our database or in a file. Finally, once these informations are stored in a runtime, so we used to see it actually from the file, or we can have a web-based page like a DSV page where we can view the logging information or error information. And also some of the organization we just log that error into our server log as well using debug log information, using a debug log built-in service. And also in the same exception block or catch block, what we used to do is we used to send an email to our support team so that they will aware this particular service is getting failed or it got failed. So and also in some scenario, if we have a connectivity to our ticketing tool, we used to call the web services which are related to the ticketing tool, using which we can raise any ticket in ticketing tool. And also in some environment, if we have a tools like Splunk or Kibana, these are the logging framework tool using which we can see the log. So we can install this kind of framework and we can push our logs to that particular system so that we can monitor from this logging framework. I'll move on to the next question. How will you implement if else and switch case in web method using flow steps. So mainly we'll use a branch flow step. In a branch, so for if else, in the branch property there is something called set evaluate label, which we will set it to true. So if you wanted to set any expression, then we will set this evaluate label to true, and then we will set the expression. And if you want to set it like a switch case, then this particular evaluate label will put it as a false, so that we can have the variable in a switch. That particular switch we can act, it will act like a case statement. I'll move on to the next one. How to get the current index of the list in a loop. So for example, this loop is mainly to iterate an array. So once you loop the particular document list or any kind of array, so what will happen, once you go inside the loop, this particular $iteration field, it will get created, and which will get increment every loop. Whenever you complete one iteration, it will become iteration plus 1. So there is a special variable on the pipeline called $iteration, which will be incremented as a loop operator processed through the list. So using which, you can take the current index of that particular iteration. Next one, if you specify the repeat count as 10, how many times does the loop repeat? So this is mainly for repeat stuff. For example, if you are specifying any count, then in web method it will try to execute more than 1. Okay, so because it will start from the iteration 0, so that is why if you set count as 10, it will execute for 11 times. If you set the count as 5, then it will execute for 6 times. What is specification? So how will you create a specification? For example, you go to the package or server folder, right click new, and where you see flow service, Java service, there only you will have something called specification. So specification is an IS element that defines a set of service input and output. If you have multiple services with the same input and output requirement, you can point each service to a single specification rather than manually specify individual input and output fields in each service. For example, if you have in your service you are going to add 2 numbers, then what kind of input we can have? We can have a number 1, number 2 as a input and result as a output. But if instead of defining these input and output directly in a service, you can create in a specification where you can define these input and outputs, so that if you are creating another service to multiply 2 inputs or subtract 2 inputs, all the stuff, you can use the same specification in order to handle that. So this way you can reuse the specification in multiple places, and also if there are any input is getting changed or input is getting added, then you can change it in only one place, so that wherever it is referenced, it will automatically get reflected. I'll move on to the next one. When there are 10 subscribers connected to universal messaging for the same document type, how will you publish only to a particular subscriber? For example, I have a universal messaging as my messaging provider. It could be your broker also. So when you publish it, normally what will happen? It will go to messaging layer, and then after that, whatever the trigger you have, it will subscribe. For example, I have one document, I have 10 subscribers. Then all the 10 will subscribe, or any of the trigger which is matching that condition, it will subscribe, correct? But again, if you wanted to send it to specific trigger or specific subscriber, then what we will do? So we can use these services, pub.publish.deliver. So this service, it will send the data to specific subscriber or specific trigger, and that will happen in asynchronous. You won't wait for any reply. But if you wanted to wait for a reply from the trigger, then you can use deliver and wait service. I'll move on to the next one. What is WSDL? What does the WSDL file contains? So in web method, we used to create a web services. If you wanted to create any SOAP based web service, or if you want to consume any SOAP based web service, we use WSDL. So WSDL is a web service description language. So this particular file, WSDL file, which will have XML data. So it will have a specification or definition of the data in a XML content. for a SOAP based web service. So if you are going to consume any SOAP based web service, then we will have this WSDL, because this is the WSDL will tell us about the input structure or response structure or URL endpoint details, everything about the web service. It will have the definition there. We can use that to understand our web services. So mainly this is used in a SOAP based web service. I'll move on to the next one. How will you create a SOAP based web service in web method? So in order to call any data or in order to call any function in real time, we use web service. So mainly web service, we will use SOAP based web service or REST based web service. So here the question is, how will you create a SOAP based web service? So when I say SOAP based web service, there are two things. One is we have a flow service in web method which I wanted to expose it as a SOAP based web service. That is one, that we call it as a provider, because we are providing our service as a SOAP based web service. And next one is consumer. If somebody is having or some system is having a web service which I wanted to call, so that is kind of a consumer. So how do we do it? So you just go to new web service descriptor, then you select a provider. So provider is something, we have few flow services which I wanted to expose it as a SOAP based web service from web method. So in this case, web method is a provider. So once you select the web provider, what it will ask, what are the service you wanted to expose it. So you can select list of services. Each service will be exposed as a operation. In SOAP world, you can have a same SOAP service where you can have a multiple operation. For example, I have a web service for a calculator which can have a operation like add, multiply, divide, all those operation, it will come under the same SOAP service. And once you create web service descriptor for provider, that service will get created in web methods, and once it's created in web method, we will have a WSDL also which we can give it to our external app. So whoever wants to consume our service, we can give our WSDL so that we will act as a provider, and whoever is going to consume, they will act as a consumer. Similarly, if I wanted to consume some web service, so then what will I do? So if I wanted to consume any SOAP based web service, the application which is exposing that web service, they will give a WSDL file for us. So we will browse the WSDL detail to consume the web service. When you do this consume web service, it will create the required connector for us, which is a web service connector, using which we will call that particular SOAP based web service from web method. I'll move on to the next one. How to create a REST service in web method. So the previous question was how to create a SOAP based web service. So how to create a REST web service? New REST resource, and then you have to select the resource type, and there will be two options. One is to select empty resource and other one with methods, and also there will be a checkbox where you can generate a API URL template which will help us to create a different default methods. For example, REST has a method like get, put, post, delete, those kind of methods it will automatically create, and also it will create with a name what we specify. For example, if I specify employee as my resource name, then under the employee you will have a different methods like getting an employee, adding an employee, deleting an employee. So all those methods will get created. So in that we can call our flow service. So whenever someone call our REST web service, it will internally call our flow service. I'll move on to the next one. What are the different services which we will use in flat file processing? So in web method we can process XML file, flat file. So this question is mainly for the flat file. So we need to receive the data as a flat file. For example, I'm going to pick up some data from SFTP location or FTP location, which is a flat file data. If I wanted to process the flat file data, then what I need to do, I need to use this convert to value service in order to convert my flat file data to my IS document structure. Then only once I have the document mapped to my IS document, then I can map to any other document. So while converting this one, we will give a flat file schema detail so that it can parse the data and it can map to our IS document. Similarly, once I have the IS document created, this is for the sending a flat file to some other system. So assume you have a XML data which you have converted to flat file string. So before converting to flat file string, you will have everything converted as a IS document which you wanted to convert to the string. Then you can use this convert to string service in order to convert that to flat file string. So these services are available in the WM flat file package. I'll move on to the next one. SOAP versus REST web service. So in web method we are using a SOAP based web service also, or REST based web service as well. So we act like we will consume the web service and also we will provide the web service as well. Just to understand what is the difference. SOAP is simple object access protocol. So that's a protocol. It's a XML based. And in the SOAP structure, if you look at it, it will have a SOAP header, SOAP body, and also it will have a fault segment as well, which is mainly for error handling. So it has a inbuilt error handling in the structure itself. And the payload is more compared to REST. For example, if you see the XML data, it will start with some starting tag and end tag for each element. But in the REST, it will have only the key, which is kind of your starting tag, but it will not have any ending tag. So every value it is mapped to key. So this way the XML payload size or the payload size of the particular message, it will be half the size in the REST. So that way it is more efficient. So when you exchange the data through HTTP or HTTPS, it will be more faster, because here if I am exchanging the data for 100 KB, here I will be exchanging the data only in 50 KB. So in the network latency perspective, it will be more efficient and it will be more faster as well. So here REST represented state transfer. So that's the protocol, and there is no built-in error handling, and it can be REST JSON or XML. Okay, it could be JSON or XML. In the SOAP, it will be XML. I'll move on to the next one. How will you connect SFTP server to drop the file in web methods? So for example, I have a SFTP server where I need to send the data. Then how do I send the data? So when I need to send the data to SFTP, I need SFTP host name, username, password, and if there are any keys, I need this information. So first what I'll do, I'll just go to ISAdmin where I'll create the SFTP server detail. So which will have a host name and port, using which I will create the SFTP server alias. Once that is done successfully, I'll go to another page where I'll create a SFTP user alias. This is the place I'll give a username, password, and also SFTP server alias detail, and also the key username password information in order to create the user alias. Once the user alias is created, I can do a test connection from there in order to verify I'm able to connect to SFTP server or not. So once these all setup is done in integration server, from the designer you can write a flow service where you can call this login service. There you can mention the SFTP user alias. So it will take all the details from the SFTP user alias in order to connect to the SFTP server, and it will create a session key for us. So once the session is established, we can use other method to change the directory, and you can use a put command to drop the file to required location. This is for sending the data to SFTP location. Similarly, if you wanted to pick the data from SFTP location, instead of put, we will use a get method in order to download the file. I'll move on to the next one. What is EAA B2B? So EAA is kind of application to application integration or enterprise application integration, which happens within your organization. For example, in my organization, I have a middleware tool where I want to exchange the data within my CRM system, or a CRM system to my SAP data, SAP system, or SAP to IBM. So whatever the system I have in my architecture, if I am going to send or exchange any data within my organization, then it is enterprise application integration. So all the system we are trying to integrate through middleware technology within our organization. It's called EAA. And what is B2B? So for example, I wanted to order something from my external partner, my supplier. Then the communication is happening outside organization as well. So we are going to exchange the data from my company to another company. Then that is called B2B. So there's not only we are sending messages to them, it is also the external partner or our customer or supplier sending the data to our infrastructure as well, or our services as well. So that is called B2B, business to business. I'll move on to the next one. What are the different adapters you have used? So as we are working in web method, so we have many adapters. If you are working in the on-premise integration, we call that as adapter. And mainly most of the integration you will have it as JDBC adapter, using which you can connect to any database like Oracle, MS SQL, or any other RDBMS database. And MQ adapter is just to connect to the MQ system to drop the messages to the queue, and also in order to receive the message from IBM MQ, we can use MQ adapter. AS400 adapter, if you have a AS400 mainframe system, if you wanted to call any RFC, then you can create a connection and you can call their RFC as well. SAP adapter, it's mainly to talk to SAP system. For example, if SAP is sending a IDOC which you want to listen and receive it. Similarly, if you wanted to push some IDOC to SAP, then we can use SAP adapter. So IDOC is mainly for the asynchronous communication. If you wanted to call some BAPI, which is a synchronous connection to SAP in order to run anything in a real time, then you can use a BAPI as well. Kafka adapter, this is a big data system where they have a messaging layer called Kafka, Apache Kafka. If you wanted to connect to Apache Kafka in order to drop some messages or receive some messages, you can use Kafka adapter. Similarly, there are many adapters. Based on your experience, whatever the adapters you have worked, you can explain that. I'll move on to the next one. Tell me the different types of templates in JDBC adapter. So mostly everyone might have used JDBC adapter. So what are the different things which we can achieve in JDBC adapter? So we have a different kind of template. For example, select SQL in order to fetch some data from the database table. Insert, just to insert some tables, to insert some record into the table, updating the record, deleting the record from the table. And we have a custom SQL, dynamic SQL, where if you wanted to, here this is first 4 is kind of a template where you can it's kind of a user based interface where you can select the table, you can browse the table, you can specify the field names, automatically you can select the field name, where condition, everything through the user based there will be a wizard where you can select everything. But this custom dynamic SQL, you can write your own query and from there you can execute the query. And also batch insert update, it's to insert some bulk record. For example, I have a 100 record, I want to use one connection and I want to insert it, then you can use a batch insert. Similarly, batch update to update records together in a single connection. Similarly, if you have any store procedure in your database, you can use these things to invoke any store procedure which are already available in database. I'll move on to the next one. What is finally block? So if you wanted to execute any specific flow steps irrespective of success or failure, then we can use finally sequence. For example, normally if you wanted to, we will have this kind of sequence in web method where you can handle a try catch block. So which will start with main sequence, which is exit on success. Under the main sequence, you will have a try and catch. And see the indentation, so it is under the main sequence where you have a try and catch. Try normally it will be exit on failure sequence, catch it will be exit on done. So after the main sequence, the same level you will have a finally sequence. So even if try, whatever it's happening, the try, catch or anything, even it goes to try, it will come to finally. Even it goes to catch, case of failure, finally it will come to this finally sequence. So what we will do this one, even my entire flow is failing or success, still I wanted to execute some of the steps. Then you can put those steps in your finally sequence. So mostly in the finally sequence, we will drop some variables which are not required. And in the earlier version, right, like in the 9.x or 8.x, we will use a finally sequence in order to achieve that. But in the latest version, we have something called finally block as well, which you can use it to achieve the finally thing in web methods. I'll move on to the next one. What is file polling port? So if you go to IS admin page and you have a port section where you can configure a different port, there's one of the port is called file polling port. If you wanted to monitor any specific folder to process the file, so if your file system is on-premise and it's mounted to any file system, or it is in your on-premise infrastructure itself, you are receiving some files which you wanted to monitor and you wanted to process the file. Whenever the file comes, I wanted to process it to some other system. Then what you can do is you can create the file polling port. I'll move on to the next one. How do you set the permission of the service? So for example, I can create a flow service and somebody wants to consume that service. I am going to set that ACL. It could be a REST service or SOAP-based service. Finally, somebody has to consume it. So we need to give our username and password in order to access the service. And what we can do is, for example, I have a services which are specific to my CRM domain. My services specific to logistics domain. I wanted to limit the access to some set of stakeholders. Then what I can do, I can create some ACL where I can assign list of users. That ACL I can assign to that particular service. In that way, we can allow specific users to access that particular service. So how do we set the permission? So you can go to service, you can open a service and click the property in the right side. In the property there is something called permission. You just click that. There you will have a execute ACL, read ACL, all those stuff. If this is mainly for a execute ACL, then you can click execute ACL. There you can select your ACL, which one you want to associate with it. Then whoever wants to invoke that particular user, it should be part of that particular ACL. I'll move on to the next question. Have you received critical issue in web method? How did you resolve that? For example, if you're working in a support domain, so daily there will be an issue, might be it's a SFTP or a priority 2 ticket, all the stuff. So is there any priority 1 ticket you have received it? If yes, you just explain that. So these are the some sample. For example, IS was down, then if it is on-premise, then that's a server, it's going to host all your services. So that will be a major impact. So what kind of issue you have faced? Is that something, you are not able to connect to database due to issue has arisen, or what is that issue? You have to explain that. For example, you can tell some file system is full and you cannot access the file system. Then we can remove unwanted logs in order to bring the IS, because you need some file system to write the logs, right? So we need some space. So we can clear the space and we can bring up the IS. And for a longer run, what you have to do, you have to create a script or a service which delete these files automatically. So that one we can tell it as a permanent fix, you have done it. And similarly, if there is a cache got corrupted which unable to start the cache manager, if you are depending on the cache manager for your configuration entries for all your interface, then everything will get impacted. Then what you can do is, if there is something you don't know the issue, then you can recreate the cache and you can reload all the configuration value to your memory. So that is those are the issues you can explain. And similarly, if you have any other issue which you have faced it, then that you can explain as part of this question. I'll move on to the next one. How load balancing is done in web method integration server. So for example, if you have in your production or QA environment, so normally in order to share the load balance, we can have more than one integration server. If these server, in order to share the load, what we need to do, so we need to configure the clustering. This is kind of a software load balancing. If there are any requests coming to our environment, then based on the server load or the particular integration server load, it will share the load across the multiple nodes which are part of that cluster. For example, my scheduler is running in the node 1. So the next time when it runs, it will run in a node 2. So this is kind of a software clustering. And you have one more thing called hardware load balancing. So before it comes to web method itself, so I wanted to load balance it through hardware load balancing. So for example, I have a load balancer URL. Instead of sharing my individual server host name and port name, what I'll do, I'll create my load balancer URL in the load balancer server, which will receive the request and which will route it to my individual node. So based on the server availability, it will perform some internal health check. So whatever the node is available, it will send the load to that particular node. So this way we can do kind of some kind of hardware load balancing as well. I'll move on to the next one. What is $default? In web method, in flow services, mainly in the map step or branch sequence, all those stuff, right? So we use this $default, $null, and $parent, $loop, all those kind of variables. So what this $default does, so when an unmatched value occurs at the runtime, for example, I have a branch where I have a field called order origin, and if the order origin value is website, then I have a code website. I'm executing some set of sequences, and if it's a kiosk, I'm doing something. And if it is having default label, then if it is not if order origin is not website, not kiosk, then the default sequence will get executed. So default is nothing but it's when an unmatched value occurs at the runtime, because in the code we only handle two things, website and kiosk. So if there is something coming like a POS, which is a point of sale. So if it is coming like that, then anything which is not matching at the runtime, then it will go to default sequence. I'll move on to the next one. What are the different type of testing you perform before moving the code to production environment? So for example, when you develop anything in a designer, for example, I have an integration where I need to pick the data from my source, do some transformation and send it to target. So what kind of testing we do? So one is without connecting to the source and target system, because at the time of development, it may not be ready as well. So we wanted to verify the mapping input and output. So I'll pass some input to my service. I'll try to see the output is coming as expected. So that is kind of a unit testing. And also once the source and target system is ready, then I'll do kind of integration testing where I'll ask the team to send the data from the source, which I will receive it, and I'll do a conversion or transformation, and finally I'll send the data to the target system. I'll ask them to verify. So they have to verify what data they have sent it from the source. They have to match it with the target system. So this is kind of a system integration testing. And other than that, so in the system integration testing, so it could be done by your QA team or any other team. UAT testing, the next one is UAT testing. This overall functionality needs to be verified by the business user. So then the business user will do some kind of UAT testing in order to verify everything is working as expected. And next one is performance testing. So if you have a tight SLA, or if you are expecting that particular interface to have more volume of data coming through that service, then we need to run some performance testing to understand the benchmark of that SLA and all the things we need to verify. For example, I have a SLA of 3 seconds for my service. Then I have to see, maybe when I invoke for the one run, it might give it within a 2 second, which is within SLA. But when I run 100 requests at the same time, so then what will happen? So those kind of things I have to do it in a performance testing. Next one, how will you ensure whether integration server started successfully? For example, you are starting the integration server. So there are many ways to start the integration server. Assume you are starting the integration from the command line. So when you start it, it will start loading all the packages. Once all the packages, adapters, listener, everything is on, then finally you'll be able to see the message called initialization completed within these particular seconds. So this log you can verify. So once that is done, your integration server started successfully. You can also double confirm by opening from the browser as well. So you can open from the browser what is the host name and port. You can give integration server host name and port. Then you will be able to see pop-up is coming for username and password, which you can fill it, and you can see the integration server is running. And I'll move on to the next one. What is the purpose of clear pipeline? So in the built-in service, you have something called pub.flow.clear pipeline. It will clear all your pipeline data. For example, whenever you have the data in your pipeline, it will load into your memory, right? So you wanted to save that memory so that it can be used for other services. So what you can do, you can use this clear pipeline service, which will clear all the pipeline data except there is an input called preserve. So for example, if I wanted to preserve some specific output, right? Then you can preserve that output by giving a variable name. So what is a variable or what is a document I wanted to preserve? So you can give those information. Then this clear pipeline will delete all the information except the one which is preserved. I'll move on to the next one. What are the ways to reload the package? So for example, you have created the package, you have applied some changes which you wanted to reload it. Okay. So what are the ways to reload it? So you can right click in your designer, and there is something called package. The reload option is there. You can click to reload, or you can go to your IS admin and go to the package management, and you can go to your package. In the same row, you'll have a button for reload. So you can click that, it will reload the package. I'll move on to the next one. What is adapter service? So mainly if you wanted to connect any adapter resource, right? So we can create an adapter service. So mainly for if you assume like if you are going to use a JDBC adapter, then I'm going to call some records from the table. For example, I have a table called employee where I want to fetch all the employee record. Then I will be creating adapter service to fetch the employee data. So what is adapter service? It connects to adapter resources and initiates an operation on the resources. So for example, adapter, it could be any adapter. Okay, so for example, if it is a JDBC adapter, then using that it will connect to the resource. For example, assume you are connecting to the Oracle table, the adapter connect to the Oracle database and it initiates the operation on a resource. For example, in the Oracle database, we have a table where I wanted to fetch the data, right? So it helps to talk to that particular table and it retrieves the result. I'll move on to the next one. What are the other companies which provides the integration tool? So we are working on SoftwareAG web methods. So what are the other tools are there which helps to perform the integration? So we have MuleSoft and we have a Dell Boomi and also we have TIBCO, and there are other tools in the market as well. And next question. So this is the last question for today. What is minimum pole and maximum pole size in JDBC connection? So when you create a JDBC connection, at the bottom you will have set of fields where there will be some set of connection pole settings will be there, where you can configure minimum pole and maximum pole. In the JDBC connection, when you create it, by default minimum pole it will come as a minimum pole size will come as a 1 and maximum it will come as 10. So what is this? Mainly when you create a connection and when you try to enable the connection, whatever the number you mention, the pool size, it creates the instances for that. Okay, for example, it creates, if I specify 1, it creates a single instance of the connection on the initialization of the connection pool. So when you enable the connection, it initializes the connection pool where it maintains all your connections. So for example, if you say 1, it create and keep one connection for you. For example, your adapter service is going to invoke some table using this connection. This connection pool already have one connection and it will give readily, it will serve the connection. So if you specify 0, then it will create no connection at the time of instantiation. For example, if you enable a connection, it will not create any connection. So it will keep 0 only. So what is this 1 and 10? 10 is for maximum. For example, if your adapter service is calling the database which use one connection, and again you are calling from another table where you are doing some transaction where you are using a same transaction, same table, or the same time you are getting multiple calls to the same service which will try to use all the connection from this pool. So whenever something is used and completed, then it will release that from that particular connection pool so that you can use that connection pool as well, or the particular connection as well. So once it's reached 10, then if the 11th request are coming at the same time, then it will wait for some time. So that timeout value we can set it in the block timeout. For example, if I set 5 seconds, it will try to wait for 5 seconds. Meanwhile, if the connection is free, then it will use that connection. And there is something called expire timeout. So this is I have a 10 connection pool. I have used it, but whenever I use it, I wanted to clean up those connections which are not used. So there is something called expire timeout, which inspect the pool. It checks the pool. It is anything inactive connections are there, then it will every these seconds, right? So for example, expire timeout, I have set that as a 30 seconds. Okay, every 30 seconds it will try to see my connection pool and it will see any inactive connections are there, then it will try to remove it so that you can use it for other services. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you. Hi, thank you for watching this video so far. If you like the video, please share it with your friends and also subscribe to this Tech Lightning channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.